Hi everyone.
Hi. Hi.
Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, so nice to see you all. So tell me if you can't hear me very well or anything. You can hear me okay?
Good.
Yeah, all good.
So yeah, my name is Anastasiia and I curated the installation upstairs this month. So I'm gonna talk you through a little bit through what I do and the display and just tell you a little bit about Russian queer culture and Russian queer community and what's going on. So yeah, so basically I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm a writer and curator. I am from St. Petersburg in Russia and I moved to London about almost 9 years ago actually. So I started my career writing about fashion primarily and I happened to be writing quite a lot about things from Russia. Especially around 2015, when some of you might remember Russian style and certain Russian fashion designers were really popular. So I got a lot of work for that. And my main areas of interest are, well, still fashion and its political dimensions, and also visual culture, identity and visual culture, and of course queer culture as well. This is my third show in a physical space in London. I co-curated a photography exhibition about the new wave of Eastern European photography, which was in 2016 in Cabaret Foundation. And then this year in February, which I was really lucky, just literally before the pandemic, a month before the pandemic, I also had a show called The Real Thing at Fashion Space Gallery, and that was about fashion bootleg and social and political dimensions of fashion bootleg, and also fashion fakes as a creative language for various disruptive artists, which was a really fun one to do. But this project up there and in online space, titled Russian Queer Revolution, is really special for me, probably more special than other projects I've done, because of course it touches upon my own identity as a Russian person and queer person. And genuinely I feel like it's something, I felt like when I started it that it was something which was pretty needed. So I started the project as an Instagram account in January this year. I started as an Instagram just because it was easy and free, and as a curatorial platform I think it's pretty handy because you've got all the tools and you've got the audience and it's just really easy to start. And I started it because I was writing quite a lot about the new wave of Russian queer creatives, be it musicians, fashion designers, photographers, and so on. I think since about 2018 I've been doing that, and I'll tell you later about why it started all happening in 2018. And I had this feeling that as someone who speaks Russian, I have this access to all this beautiful work which people who don't speak Russian or don't spend time on the Russian internet for that reason wouldn't see, and I just had this feeling that I could probably create a space where all of this could sit together and also create this representation of what being Russian, being queer looks like in 2020. So that was one reason, but I also had a personal reason as well, because being an immigrant and living in London for such a long time and being queer also, I always had a feeling like whenever I met someone and told them all of these things about myself, I then had to explain over and over again what it means to be queer and coming from such a conservative country, and what it was like growing up there, and are there queer people in Russia, and is it possible? And I had to always have this conversation, so I was like, it would be great if there was a little bit more of us in the global queer culture as it is. So I just thought it would be great to create, I don't create this representation, but I create like at least a little school. Sorry, that was premature. How do I go back? Yeah. So yeah, I felt that it would be great to create at least a little bit of space for that representation. And I also have to say I've always been super inspired by the work queer people of color and the black queer community do about creating their identity in a space which primarily is usually occupied by, well, I guess the mainstream of LGBTQI plus representation in queer culture is usually perceived as Western, American, I mean Anglo-Saxon, white, so on. So I've been always inspired by like how black queer community creates a language and representation for themselves where there is none. So I mean, even from London, I can think of, let's say, Pussy Palace, the party, or Black Fuzzy, which talks about like black queer experience and sexuality, projects like that. So I thought that kind of following that inspiration, I could also do something which would be about being Russian and being queer. And of course, I mean, to have representation, which I didn't have when I was growing up, because I didn't have that many examples. Although the queer representation which I grew up with, yeah, you all know. So even though it wasn't enough, those did something good back then. And that is from yeah 2000 or 2001, if I remember correctly. When I was 12 years old. So I do remember being quite obsessed by tattoo, and there are a few records. I had them all on CDs. I was like very into the videos as well. Yeah, I actually can't say that I was like aware of being queer back then, perhaps. But there was something about it which I think was really relatable for a lot of young people, in terms of exploration of sexuality and also being very non-conformist, because all of the messages is always about being against the conservative society, and I think that was just something quite liberating to have in a mainstream, just literally on TV, and just to have that was pretty cool. Even though everybody involved in the project insists that it was just a stage trick, that they in no way were real lesbians, or that was in no way real, and none of them also is notoriously homophobic and have had some homophobic stuff in the past. But anyway, I also love this story because even though this is probably staged or fake queerness, it also becomes real because it becomes part of the global pop culture and global queer pop culture. So it's then becomes this language we use to talk about our feelings, and this I always felt was quite beautiful, and this is probably, I mean, one of the really few contributions which are well known of Russian people to like global queer pop culture. I mean, I don't know, you might know some other things, the non-Russian people, you know, I don't know, maybe Slava Magutin, or but I think these examples you can really count on fingers of one hand, perhaps, which I felt was really a shame. So yeah, just a little bit about the project. So what I want to do with Russian Queer Revolution is, despite the fact that it's on Instagram, I don't really want to call it a social media platform. First of all, because I'm not that great at social media, as a, you know, I guess the huge following and the frequent updates is not what I'm really aiming for with this. I'm looking at it more as a visual archive, and Instagram has been quite popular tool for people trying to aim to document and preserve certain existing visual culture. I mean, there's lots of accounts. I'm sure you follow a lot of them. Let's say from accounts which do lesbian memes to accounts which like LGBTQ history, I think one is called. So basically, you have like archival imagery or existing imagery aggregated together. And I would really love that if someone somewhere came up with a course of how to archive better, because I also understand that Instagram has its limitations and it's perishable and it's going to disappear at some point. So it would be really a shame to lose all of that aggregated information. So, and we all know that there's great power in archiving, and that archiving shouldn't be just for institutions, it should be for everyone. And that's why we have some great places as like Bishopsgate Institute, or which do archives for us to a degree, but it would be great if we also had knowledge of how to do archiving ourselves. One of the artists who I'm really inspired by is Naeem Bree, who's based in New York. She's a photographer, so she does it slightly differently. She basically photographs her own queer community in Brooklyn, and it's mostly black and POC people and lesbians, but also gender non-conforming people and binary people. So basically people who are not usually at the far front of the documentation. So, and she also collects personal belongings. So it's similar to, if you know, Museum of Transology. It's also a great archival project, which also about like collecting stories and personal belongings and things. So I think just archiving as an idea is really powerful, and that's how I kind of wanna view my project. And of course, another aspect is connecting Russian queer people to queer people worldwide, or at least showing them that there is a demand and there is appreciation for their work, which they don't necessarily see in their own country sometimes, because I can understand that it can feel pretty lonely being creative in general. It can be even more lonely to be being like creative and queer in a small town, or like you can feel pretty disconnected. And with all the this and all these concerns about social media, sometimes it can be quite a good connection to people who are like you in other places. So I guess yeah, just showing appreciation is something which is really important for me. So I'll talk a little bit about what you should understand. So the installation is about 70 portraits of Russian LGBTQIA+ people. Why I decided to do it like this? So I wanted to do something which would be like just like a collective portrait of the community, but obviously it's not all of the community, it's just like a really tiny fraction, and that's why it was quite difficult to choose, because I don't want to be like, I am the person to decide who gets represented and who doesn't, and it was really difficult to pick. So I obviously tried to represent a broad range of identities, all the letters in LGBTQI+, and also just show that not only what it means to be Russian and queer, but what it means to be Russian and how Russian people could be represented, because I feel in the global culture we don't really get a lot of variety of how we can be seen or looked at. So it was kind of important to me to show that Russian people can be gender non-conforming, or Russian people can be gender fluid, or Russian people also can have all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds. Russian people can be black or Asian, or Russian people can be trans, and that was pretty powerful, I think, for myself as well, to see, just as someone who kind of, well, I go to Russia and I am Russian, but I guess I do get this like mirrored image of myself from the media all the time, so it was good to remember that there's greater variety than how we are. Originally I wanted all of these pictures to be self-portraits, but then it kind of derailed a bit, because a lot of people actually have a lot of collaborators, they work with other people, they are really good at photography themselves, so it kind of became a more fluid affair of how people want to be seen. But also one of the primal inspirations was, again, Instagram, because when even before I started the project, just writing about Russian queer culture, obviously there are activists and there are organizations and there are magazines and so on, but I was just really inspired by how people represent themselves on social media and how it can be a really free space. Because obviously, if you live in Russia and you're queer, there are not that many safe spaces for you, as if there are not that many safe spaces where you can be 100% yourself. So it wouldn't be on the street, or it wouldn't be, well, it could be at home, it could not be, it could not be around your family or colleagues. So I just kind of realized that, or at least what it looked like to me, that a lot of young people just use this as a very empowering tool to say I'm here and this is what I look like and this is what I want to look like and this is how I want to be seen. So it was really important for me so that they would choose the picture they want included and they would kind of just have this agency of being who they are. And also, again, from the Western perspective, not just being seen through the media lens, but being like, this is who they are, and we created the story ourselves. This was really what I was interested in, and the fabric draping and the installation around it. Well, it's done in the colors of the Russian flag, which is a bit on the nose, but I collaborated with a London-based Samoan-Irish queer artist called Joshua Fay, so he did the design of the installation for me and also did all the draping, and we chose the fabrics together. So yeah, I mean the colors were kind of an obvious one, but I also wanted it to look a bit playful, maybe a bit camp, very kind of intimate and celebratory, as opposed to being like harsh and communist or anything, you know. I was trying to avoid this kind of harshness, which usually comes through with all the narratives about Russia. So I wanted like a really soft font, and I wanted like a soft display, and some fabrics are sheer, some fabrics are crushed velvet. The colors are a bit off, so the colors are not exact flag colors, they're like just a little bit different. And I looked into the symbolism of colors as well a bit, because red, the color red is a very important color in our culture, like long before communism. It's just the color which means beauty, a color which means celebration. It's just like a color from like fairy tales and so on. So I guess this was just kind of wanted to create something poetic and something to kind of wrap around this, for it to be just something nice and welcoming to look at. Okay, so I mean, I get this question a lot. So a lot of people ask me about what Russian LGBTQ+ community is like, and what I always tell them is that I am not the good person to answer this question because I don't live in Russia for almost 9 years. So I'm really not the person who should be asking this. So I guess your primary source, if you want to see or read more, is Augustine, which is, they were on Days 100 this year. So it's a magazine created by Dmitry Kozichenko and Sasha Kazantseva. Sasha Kazantseva also runs an amazing blog about lesbian sex, which is unfortunately only in Russian, which I think is a great shame because she really does, she does great educational content about all kinds of sexual practices and all kinds of queer sexual practices, and I wish stuff like that existed in English. Actually, once we kind of did something, someone Russian did something more ahead in that direction. So, so yeah, basically this project is self-funded and completely supported just by the people who do it. The team is quite small, but it runs completely just on the enthusiasm of these people, and it started in 2018 and it's created an amazing, just like an amazing starting point for community to come together and appreciate each other's work, connect. It's just, I think it's done really, in my opinion, it's done really a lot for young people, especially to just see representation of queerness, which is diverse and different, and educational content in their own language, and just to see that it exists. And I mean, about the Russian situation, if you're interested in that, people also ask me a lot if it's illegal to be gay in Russia. The answer is no, it's not illegal, but people refer to the so-called gay propaganda law from 2015, which means that there is no information about LGBTQI+ in the mainstream media, in the public space, at school, or anything which is like more or less institutional. So the internet is like a different story, because you have huge YouTube bloggers, you have obviously social media, you have places like Augustine. So I feel like online space is quite important for the community. So yeah, I think this is like a cool starting point. Or also, I can recommend you the Cabaret journal, if you know it. I work there as well part-time, and I write a lot of Russian queer content for that, because they just allow me to write anything I want, and this is all I want to write about, so this is all they get you, so I can show you. Actually, one thing which just came out today, so that's like a drag story set in a stereotypical Russian dacha setting. So stuff like that. This is probably like, I don't know, the 15th, 20th piece I've written about something Russian and queer for them recently. So you should put, and you should check it out. Then something I wanted to talk about as well is the role of social media in visibility. So these are a few examples of Russian Instagram accounts, which are, I mean, you could call these people bloggers or influencers, but I don't know, I don't want to limit it to just that. But it's basically accounts which are run by one person or by a couple, which are all very openly queer and very open and upfront about both their values and both just details of their intimate life, which I find absolutely fascinating, because some of these people have over 200,000 followers, which is just massive amounts. And I think what they do is really, really important, just because not only they create this representation for lots of younger people, and I mean, generally for anyone who wants to look at it, I just also think it's so great that they create this visual language of intimacy and queer love, and something which is just very normal and sometimes very day-to-day. It's just queerness which is not connected to, which is not seemingly directly connected to political activism, which is not connected to any suffering and oppression. It's just basically being queer and at home and relaxed and happy, and I think it just would give people so much hope and so much just like good vibes. So I really love that, and I think just this openness can be so radical, despite the fact that it might not look very radical, but I consider the place they live in, this is really, really powerful, I think. And another thing which I think is different now to when I lived in Russia in my early 20s, is that a lot of creatives used to say that their sexual orientation or their sexual preferences is just their own business, and they don't want to bring it into their work, and it's basically not connected. Which I think is, of course, a valid choice, because public coming out is a choice for everyone. You can do it, or you cannot do it, and you're right. But I think what happened now is that people of all the spectrum of LGBTQIA plus identity, they understand that, and they want their queerness to be part of their work and part of their identity and part of their mission, and they're kind of ready to speak for themselves, but also for more vulnerable members of the community. So I think this is really great, and this is something which I really admire, and this is something I don't want to directly advocate for as a person who lives in a different country which is safer and which is obviously it's just easier to be openly queer here than it is back in Russia. But I think it's just kind of really deserves respect and appreciation what openly queer people do in Russia at the moment. Yeah, this is a quote from Dmitry Kozchenko, co-founder of Augustine. So I really like that, because I've been thinking a lot about, and I've been looking at people's work a lot as well. I've just been thinking about how authenticity, or like just thinking of a new language for your own queer identity in relation to where you are is quite important, because at least people of my generation, all the examples of queer culture we saw were Western, mostly Western examples. So we, if we're lucky, read about Stonewall, or we might have seen some gay films, but there was never anything which was well, apart from tattoo, I guess, there was hardly ever anything which was said, which was in the settings which were familiar to us, or which was also in the settings familiar to us and with people like us, and which was also not traumatic and horrible, but nice and like fun to look at. So I think it's quite important to try to look at your own culture and see, and try to look at, try to kind of find something queer in it. And I think, unfortunately, because of the political situation in Russia and the authorities' position, the notions of Russian and queer are just looked at as something, as like the two opposites, that you cannot be both, that if you're queer, then you maybe you're not that Russian, you don't fit that like Russian stereotype, or you don't fit that ideology which your government like projects. But truth is, I think that just queerness is something quite, I mean, it has nothing to do with being Western, or it's always something which has been there in our culture. And yeah, I'm kind of interested in how people try to reinterpret their Russianness in a queer way. So it comes out sometimes quite like camp and over the top, but in quite a humorous way. So these two for the project, I have a good example. So this one was the Smile of the Kremlin. It's pretty camp. So that was about the new generation of like queer creatives. It was Augustine and the college on a collaboration from last year. So they like deliberately, they basically deliberately wanted to mock Russian stereotypes. So they did a lot of like kind of straight, like carpet printed outfits, and like somebody was dressed like a, sort of like a grandma. But I think it came out like pretty fresh. I really like that work. And the one on the right was different queer couples kissing next to touristic sites. So it's like basically from Russia with love, that kind of postcard style thing. But I think both ended up being pretty powerful, I guess, and pretty popular as well. The one on the right was in Days, for instance, and was really, really popular. So I guess also you can't escape the fact that the key to the popularity is actually using some of the stereotypes and trying to subvert them for your own narrative. So I guess it's a really fine line. It's like, how do you present your Russianness without being like too humorous about it? So it's still sincere. It's difficult to find it, but I really like when people try and do it. So how long have I been talking for? Not so long. So I'm gonna show you maybe a couple of music videos just for fun. Yes, that's a quite good example of. I can show you another one actually if you feel like. Shall I show you another one? This one is. Yeah, so the second video is actually shot on iPhone, which I think is quite cool. And it's quite a cute story. They crowdfunded for it as well. So they just found the singer who is a non-binary person from Norilsk in the very far north of Russia, and then they just like crowdfunded and made a video for them, which was their Audience team who I talked about before. So those two video works obviously like very different. What I like about the first one is that it takes this Russian stereotype of like a guy with a buzz cut in a tracksuit, so very like hype masculine, toxic masculinity, all of this stuff which we think we know, and then it does this subversion through voguing. And Russian voguing scene is actually quite big. It's also quite strange because it's kind of very separated from the origins of voguing, obviously, and a lot of people are not really aware of it, which I think is really problematic. That, yeah, so, and it's also weirdly a lot of cis women in Russian Augustine, which always also perplexes me. But there are some great people like the the guy in the video, and it's just also something nice to think that Russian people also, especially Russian men, also Vogue, which is great. So yeah, I guess these two video works just show that the range, it's quite a broad range of what kind of creativity is out there, and it's only really getting started, I think. There's lots of people doing lots of visual career work openly, and there's lots of collaborations, so people working with each other, and this is another very beautiful thing that we have. Basically everyone working on the video will be queer, just because only queer designers would want to work with queer musicians, and then on the one hand it's quite restrictive, on the other hand it just creates this community which is really supportive, which I think is great. What else do I have? Okay. So, if you haven't seen already, I'm doing like a crowdfunding thing for Russian trans community, precisely for a trans charity in Russia called T-Action. So it's the biggest trans-led organization in Russia, and the biggest trans-led organization which helps trans people in Russia has a staff of 12 people. So, yeah, and also they have lost some funding because of COVID, so I'm just going to try to raise as much as we can for that. I'm going to do another push for it when people get paid on the 1st of October. Because this is the time when I think it's the best. But I mean, I've seen like a lot of support already, and it's really, really nice. We can maybe try to promote it through some gay meme accounts or something, because honestly, my current ruble conversion, even £5 is like pretty good. So I feel like it's really nice how it could translate into something really tangible. And I don't know, I think I'm kind of, that's it. I don't know. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions. Happy to answer them. Anything you want to know about Russian queer scene, you have no one to.
Is the Russian word for like queer and gay synonymous with paedophile?
No.
Because I watched a documentary a long time ago that said that's what all the drama was about, and why there's lots of homophobia, because they relate it to paedophilia.
I think there might be like more of a cultural link, but not language link, though, as far as I know. Because I mean, Russian word for gay is gay, and Russian word for queer is queer. Yeah. Yeah.
Like creative, yeah. Like it could
Oh,
sound
that's.
similar, but like.
But it's like
it does have.
maybe in certain like really rude slurs, but I don't think the connotation is that.
Because that's why I talk about the denial, like when they can't show the like queer culture, because they related it very closely to paedophilia, which is what England did and everywhere else has done beforehand.
Yeah, I think it's more like the global issue with that these things are looked at in
So it's not Russia specific.
So yeah, so I don't think like language-wise, I doubt that. I think we probably have maybe more specific things which relate homosexuality to like prison culture and that kind of slang and that kind of like degrading outlook, but that probably would be the only thing I'd say which comes to mind.
I had a question about the TATU slide actually. You said you were quite young then and not necessarily aware of your own queerness, but do you remember them being celebrated as like a queer thing, or were they mostly celebrated as like a band that made like an international breakthrough? Was there like queerness sort of hushed about in Russia at the time?
I mean, it's hard. It's an interesting question actually, because when I was growing up, which was, well, from what I can remember, is like very late 90s and beginning of like the 2000s. There was lots of queer stuff on TV. Like there were, especially in music, there were lots and lots of music videos and music acts where people. Music videos which like insinuated these ideas and told these stories. and also like there were like TV shows about sex which talked about that, which I was not allowed to watch, but I watched anyway. But I think what's interesting, I actually wrote an essay about it it was a starting point for an essay I wrote for the Culture Journal, which was basically all these cultural things were queer, but they were not talked about as queer.
So they weren't celebrated as queer per se?
Not really, they were more like, it was basically really separated from the political agenda. So that's, I guess, and that's one of the problems still in Russian society, that LGBTQI plus political agenda is viewed as something Western. While this kind of queer longing, which is really cryptic and really like, you know, this weird like desire for your friend who has sort of the same sex as you, is like, yeah, that was always there. But I think I read also about the similar thing in the history of cinema, like there are lots of queer coded films, which are not precisely about queerness openly, but there's lots of queer coding and lots of culture. So I think it was the same about Russia. It was never talked about as like the liberation of gay people, or it was not directly about this. So weirdly, I have a feeling that my own personal queer history didn't happen because of this, because I was never told what it was. So it was in retrospect that I looked at some things from my childhood and I was like, this was so gay. This probably made me gay. Because we have like lots of pop stars, lots of music acts, lots of public personas who then I looked at and I was like, they were definitely gay or queer or lesbian. But we just didn't use this language for them, or if this language was used, it was always something kind of like which talked really quietly and wasn't supposed to be discussed and maybe wasn't that important. So that is kind of a shame, and it's also nice to see that being reclaimed a little bit by the new generation, I think, because people not only look at Western examples, but also we're like, oh, we had this thing in the 90s and that was gay. So and it's like playing the songs and just kind of tapping into that very recent history, and actually into very remote history too. Like there is a really great Instagram project as well, for instance, the recent one. I mean, unfortunately it's only in Russian and it has an incredibly unpronounceable title, but it is this person who runs, it's basically just about gay men in Russian history. So it's lots of like very famous historical figures in Russian history who turned out were gay, which is fascinating because I didn't know about that. Then you completely have a different, when you read it, you have a different perspective on it. Like, yeah, I read about this person in history books, and it said nowhere that they were gay. Like, same about like poets and everything. It's just such a, it's good to see that someone's doing this work. Obviously not the government or the school, but it's someone from the ground is doing this, which is really nice.
Do you think that COVID will be used to suppress the gay and queer communities in Moscow and St. Petersburg a bit more, or?
I have a feeling that it's going to be, it's like everyone's oppressed, everyone's going to be more oppressed. But I think it's just quite a particular moment in Russian politics at the moment, I think, because it's like, especially what's happening in Belarus, if you follow that, I feel like it's gonna, just who goes first, who in that queue is women, queer people, all kind of activists. These are the first people, and like young people who still have this like free thinking spirit about them. So, and like people who are active online, because online space is less regulated. So I have a feeling that whenever LGBTQI plus agenda intersects with feminism, for instance, this is when everything goes absolutely mad. Like this is what happens with Yulia Tsvetkova, for instance, the person, if you know her story, who's facing 6 years in prison for just drawings she posted on Instagram, which are drawings about body positivity. So they're literally like drawings, pencil drawings of female bodies. And for that she is facing like a pornography charge. So that's like a horrendous example of how being outspokenly feminist and queer and LGBTQI plus activist somewhere outside of Moscow as well because she was from a different city. How that is really like enraging for the authorities. So I guess it's really, really hard to predict, I think. And I mean, I don't know, we actually have some activists in the room who could know better than me, so I'm like trying not to say something stupid.
No, I think it's
Yeah,
I think it's actually like very interesting because what you were saying, like would COVID be used? Yeah, exactly like Julia Sutkova's case, and there were like PKs. Is that the same in English? Like when you do a single process, because that's supposedly allowed in the law, but actually it's not, because people just get arrested. So for example, there was a protest which I was like getting ready, like drinking my coffee, like my banner in my bag, yes, on my way there, and I'm just seeing that like everyone gets arrested. And so the idea was that like she is a feminist activist, and it was actually drawings she posted on her, like she has a social page on like Russian Facebook, was called that way, which was called Monologues of Vagina. And basically it was paintings of vulva, like drawings of vulva, but also including like body positive drawings of like female bodies, and so that's why she goes under the law about like propaganda, like pornography. But also she's an LGBTQ+ activist, which you can't go to prison for it, but you can be fined under the law for propaganda of homosexuality. So the idea was that like in this protest, people would be they were arrested, even though that's allowed in the law, and the explanation for this was them breaking the COVID-19 regulation rules. So like it was them breaking down the lockdown rules, even though they were literally there alone, 2 meters apart, like with a banner. And then they would be forced into a police car where they had to like sit together for like hours and then sit together in the police station next to each other. So that's how COVID is definitely used, which is like hilarious because they usually use like any kind of absurd excuses. But this one, like breaking self-isolation laws when there's like people partying on a terrace and smoking shisha right next to you and just like kissing each other and like, I don't know, all of that jazz. That's how it's used, definitely.
Thank you. I forgot about it.
No, okay, don't worry.
Thanks. It's interesting.
Question I have about why queer or LGBT is so dangerous for the society? I mean, if you love one man, one woman together, you don't damage the society. If you build some weapon, yes. And so why is so dangerous? Why people arrest people want to love each other?
I mean, we all would agree that it's not dangerous.
Which one is the political situation? Why is against some power or something?
Yeah.
I think the people have to arrest people who want to war. They want to kill other people. Why?
It's
This happened that one in Russia.
I mean, for the Russian authorities, it's definitely just the internal enemy they wanted to create, I think. So basically to draw attention from other problems, the easiest way is to create this unified figure of someone any common person could turn against, that any common person would know. So usually it's like, let's say often it's immigrants and gay people. That's been like that for ages. Or non-white people. So it's like, it's not dangerous, it's just a propaganda. It's just like a propaganda tool, really.
Because they are...
Oh, but that's a big like myth, like, oh, because like they're not gonna, like we're all gonna die because there's gonna be no kids.
But would you, so to
Like,
relate?
that's a big argument for them. It's kind of like you can't produce kids.
For me, it's just a question. They don't want to like different type of family, and so gonna be.
No, they don't understand. I don't think they want to understand.
No, it's just a propaganda tool, that's it.
No. They're like kind of like, oh, everyone's gonna become gay and we're not gonna have kids.
Or queer people is so much fear, they don't want people free. I don't want to fit family.
That's a lovely thought.
I don't know.
Queer people are much freer.
But would you say that like within, I haven't been to Russia ever, I don't know that many Russian people, but like amongst like our generation, our age generation living in Russia, would you say that they still have these sort of attitudes towards queer people that we read about, or is it more open amongst themselves? Like you said you're from St. Petersburg, like the big city, or Moscow or stuff. If you're like a late 20s, 30-year-old person there on average, would you have more open attitudes towards queer people?
I don't know actually, it's really case by case, but I think the general social opinion is not actually that great, I'd say. Even among young people, I feel like it's just something. Also, Russian people have this very interesting trait about them that I feel like they'd be kind of accepted if they meet you in person, because they'd be like, oh, you're fine, you're gay and you're fine, it's all good, brother, like that would happen. But then they do have a lot of prejudice, and this prejudice includes a lot of things. It's just because the society is quite patriarchal, so how people are, like all the media and everything, how this conversation is structured, it's, yeah, they would be probably a little bit casually sexist, a little bit casually racist, and a little bit casually homophobic, but without thinking that it's something of a big deal. I mean, obviously it's not everyone, but I don't know. I am not out to all the members of my family, really, and even to the ones who I'm out to, it's not something we really talk about. And my family is like quite like educated people from St. Petersburg, who are pretty liberal, but it's just not the conversation which is easy to be had in that environment, unfortunately.
It's so interesting that you said that, because now it's kind of like a dark mirror situation where in Russia, and so I come from Romania, and you have a sort of similar dynamic when it comes to like queerness and the people's attitudes towards it. And it's so interesting when you say like, oh, I feel a certain way about queerness, but like, you're okay, I know you.
Yeah.
It's the same here, and like, but it's not queerness, it's immigration here, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's sort of like Black Mirror, like, I don't know, it's just a little bit of an interesting thought. Like, none of this is like very, very strange for all the people who live here. And also, I did have a question. The question that I had was, you said you were presenting the portraits that you were presenting, and you said that you were looking for a certain kind of like softness in them. And I wonder what you meant by them, because so growing up queer in a sort of Eastern European country, I felt that like kind of the roughness of it was something that is quite, I don't know, the driving force of it. So I wonder why you look for the softness, because softness here, like, and this is a completely personal thing, softness, when I hear softness here, I think, you know, centrism. I think like people sort of, oh, it's okay if you're like that if you can make us money, you know. And so I wonder, what you thought about like softness. I'm really interested to hear that.
That's an interesting one, actually. I think I meant, yeah, it's a really interesting question, thank you. I think what I meant probably was more in terms of gender presentation, maybe, just because I think everybody's used to that figure of like, if you think a Russian gay man, there's a certain fetishized image of kind of a bloke with a shaved head and an tracksuit, but like in a kind of homoerotic type narrative. So I kind of wanted to show that there is different types of like masculinity and femininity exist in there, and also in between, obviously, like. So in terms of gender presentation, I think I wanted something pretty fluid. But yeah, harshness is soft is an interesting one, because I guess it's not not politically really, because politically you have to be quite radical. But I mean, same as what you saw in those. I showed you those pictures of couples from social media, from the influencers or bloggers. So they have all really, really soft aesthetics. It's like soft to the point, it's always like really soft filters, perfect flats with like everything's like beige and like, which is great. As if like they think it's what they do. But like their imagery is so incredibly soft. It's like always like them kissing and hugging and really soft clothes, and like it's interesting that it's not just one.
Yeah.
Example, it's all of them.
Yeah.
And that I found also really interesting, because I'm like, why is that the case? And I still haven't found the answer to that. But I don't know, of course, like I guess I was biased to who I picked, maybe. As if I tried to diversify as much as I could, and I asked, like, I saw like I don't have enough lesbian representation, so I asked like a bunch of friends, like recommend me people, like recommend me someone who does cool stuff, and then just try to, and then it gets tricky when people choose their own portraits. Annoyingly, they don't choose the best ones sometimes. That's actually the worst thing, like the thing which doesn't really look good, but that was also a factor. It's interesting, yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, one of the portraits that you showed was I don't know, I may have not seen it properly, but it was someone wearing like horns on the left-hand side of the screen, which is interesting as a soft choice, but like in a very good way.
Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe not all of them are that soft, like, I think
Well, yeah, like,
softness maybe like in terms of the installation, right? Like,
yeah, there you go. So, oh no, actually it wasn't horns, it was their arms. It was the upper left-hand side.
like that picture on the right hand top corner, we didn't really include it, but we went for another one. But I was like, I'm gonna include it in the presentation because I just love this image so much. But,
No, I think they're amazing as well. I think.
yeah, it's like quite a, because also when I was choosing pictures for press, I deliberately also avoided that kind of more masculine kind of type, which, or like just think which could be like easily written off as Russian, and didn't really want to include them. So I picked like other stuff which would look a bit different. So yeah, I guess that's but yeah, thank you. And immigration obviously is like, I think everyone here who is an immigrant will know that it's absolutely 100% the case that and if you're both queer and an immigrant,
Yeah.
it's it's a tricky one, but also I guess it's an interesting place to look at the world from.
Thank you.
So great, I could do this for a month. It feels like I'm on
It's actually comfortable, like a size of audience as well.
yeah, like I'm just like at a friend's house having drinks. Yeah.
So what do you think you're going to do with the project? Do you have any plans for it, or let it just go?
I mean, I originally my ambition for it was to do, more exhibitions in physical spaces.
Then the pandemic?
But then the pandemic happened, because it's like my aim is to get these works and faces into the places where even they could never think they could end up. Like, I want these people who like, how uncomfortable you might feel walking down the street in Russia wearing a dress. I want your face to be normal after that, and I want you to see that you're great. Like, that was what I wanted really deep down. But it's tricky over physical spaces now. But I think I would love to keep it going as a physical, as an image archive, for sure. Even though it's like mentally taxing to do social media. So it's kind of, that's why I'm not really good at it. I feel like I could be like much better, but I'm trying. And I mean, it would be like the dream really is to actually raise some money which I could then give to artists to make work. That would be the dream scenario. If I could get funding from somewhere so I could fund work of creative people in Russia, that would be great, because funding there is just something which doesn't really exist much. And there's no, whereas I guess here you have more opportunities that, I don't want to say you have more opportunities for it if you're queer, because it's fair, but yeah, that would be the best thing, I guess, to kind of help somehow practically the people.
Do you find that in the UK people tend to view Russian queer experience in quite a one-dimensional way? People just kind of like, they just hear of the oppression and the regimes, like activities against queer people, and they don't kind of think of like the cultural complexities and like dimensions and community that people have created.
Oh, I mean, I think so. I would agree. At least that's what I kind of encounter when I talk to people, because they would have seen Welcome to Chechnya, and they would have read the news. I think it's good that they have, because it's a story which have to be told, and there are activists who like battle these things every day, and they also should be celebrated. But I think things which are more related to creativity or day-to-day life, or just other experiences, or also positive experiences, really also should be represented somehow. And also different faces of people, just to show again that there is a broad range of like looks and experiences and faces and voices. That's, I guess, what. And I mean, as I always, as I've said a few times by now, that I would love to see a project like this made in Brazil or in South Korea or somewhere else where we don't see many queer people from these places, just because, I don't know actually why we don't see, but because it just doesn't end up in the mainstream media.
Yeah.
So I think the more diverse voices from places, especially oppressed places we see, like the better it would be. So that would be great if someone did tell us about other countries. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.